listening, feel free to. And then we will also have the live captioning happening. So if you need captions, it'll be the CC button on the bottom of the screen. It's a Zoom meeting, so we'll take questions after the faculty, alum, and student get a chance to talk a little bit, and then we'll take questions after that. And then we'll hear from our clinics and have opportunities to speak with them in breakout rooms as well. So you're more than welcome to put your chat questions in the chat, or you can also unmute yourselves and ask directly as well. But without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Aliza Kaplan, who is our director of the Criminal Justice Reform Clinic and also a lawyering professor at Lewis and Clark.
Am I on? Okay, yes, good. Hi, I'm Aliza Kaplan. As Tess said, I am the director of the Criminal Justice Reform Clinic here and a professor. And here's what's going to happen. We are going to hear from a professor about our criminal law classes. We're going to hear about our two amazing criminal related clinics. And we're going to hear from both a current student and a former student. And we're going to let everyone speak for a few minutes, and then there's going to be plenty of time to, ask questions and stuff like that. So why don't I just do a really quick intro of our first couple speakers. We're going to hear from Professor Tung Yin, and there he is there, and he brought his cat, I think, your little friend, right? Do we not do that? Okay. And Professor Yin teaches Criminal Procedure 1, which is about police investigations and the Fourth Amendment, Criminal Procedure 2, which is about criminal adjudications, evidence, sentencing, and national security law. And this is his, oh my gosh, 20th year as a law professor, 13 of which have been at Lewis and Clark Law School. So we're going to hear from Tung in 1 second. We're also going to hear from current student Chloe Williams, and I think I pronounced it right. Okay. Chloe is a third-year law student here at Lewis and Clark, and she's about to graduate. And she's originally from Kansas and moved to Oregon for law school. And during law school, she's focused solely on public defense and is going to be a public defender after graduation. And the first time I met Chloe, she told me she was going to be a public defender, and she's wrapped that up, got her job, and is ready to go. And then we have Colin Bradshaw, who graduated last year. And Colin's originally from Chicago, and he stayed in the Midwest for college and did his undergraduate in Indiana, and he majored in English Lit and anthropology. After he graduated from college, oh my God, I love this, and I didn't know this about you. You spent a year working as a receptionist at a dentist office while applying for jobs in publishing and various nonprofits. Eventually, his significant other decided that she wanted to go to law school, so he thought it sounded good too. So they both came to Lewis and Clark. They're both amazing, and they both graduated last spring. And very quickly he realized he had a passion for criminal justice work and focused on that. And it's so nice to see you, Colin, zooming in. So we're going to start with Professor Yin, and he'll tell us a bit about the coursework and some other stuff. And so, Tung, I'm handing it over to you. You have about 5 minutes.
All right, great, thanks. Said cat is in my lap, by the way. She might or might not pop up, which probably be more interesting for all of you. But welcome. And so, yes, I've been teaching here for 13 years. And during that time, I've been teaching criminal procedure, all of it. So we offer a variety of criminal law courses. And so in the first year, the required class is Criminal Procedure 1, which if you watch Law and Order or you know about Law and Order, in the first half hour, there's the crime and the detectives investigate. That's what Criminal Procedure 1 is all about. What do the police get to do? When do they violate the Fourth Amendment, and so forth? And then in the second half hour would be when the defense lawyers, prosecutors show up. That's what's covered in Crim Pro 2. So we require Crim Pro 1 in our first year. where you get a spread of the basic core classes. And we're a little bit unusual because most law schools, I think, require criminal law one, which covers the elements of crimes, particularly murder and manslaughter and the theft crimes. We're unusual, and we have pedagogical reasons that we think criminal procedure one is for us, the way we want to teach it, a better entry point, having to do with it's grittier. There's a lot of ability and really, in fact, a necessity to discuss issues beyond just the doctrine, to cover issues of race and gender and class and policing and so on. And it's also something that we think that students are more likely to have personal interaction with. Anytime you've been pulled over for a traffic infraction, actually the Fourth Amendment governs that particular interaction. So we think it's easier for people to see the real world impact of it. If that's all for the students who don't want to do criminal practice, then they're done after Crim Pro 1. But for those who want to get into criminal practice, as I said, there's Crim Pro 2, which again is the prosecution and criminal defense part. It's also in the bar exam, but works well in terms of covering the doctrine for the students who go off and do externships in the PD's office or the DA's offices, where they can take the theory that they learn in the classroom and then see how it applies in the real world. We do offer criminal law 1, so that's the other class and sort of what you might think of as the core criminal curriculum. And that, again, is the elements of the particular crimes. For those students who want to specialize, we offer much more beyond those core classes. You would want to take evidence, which is not specifically a criminal law course, but the way I teach it actually does use a large number of criminal law examples. And then we have a number of specialty courses, which if you go on our website under our criminal law program, you can click through and see a listing of it. The listing is, we don't offer every class every year, and we always look to revise our offerings in light of what is going on in the real world. Sometimes there are new courses that come into being because we think that it's necessary to respond to things that are developing in the legal world. We draw from a variety of sources. Some of those classes are taught by the criminal law faculty, which includes, beyond me, there's Professor Kaplan, Professor Garvin, Professor Klonoff teaches Crim Pro 1 as well, and Professor Perry does not generally teach any criminal law courses right now, but has. And then we have a new faculty member, Professor Michelle Oko, who's starting in the fall, who we're really excited about having her join us. So depending on which one of us is offering specialty classes, there are additional upper division classes. And then we have a variety of adjuncts. We're here in Portland. There's a large criminal bar, and a lot of them are just interested in giving back and helping to again, teach from a real world perspective. They're doing this every day in the real world, and so they can bring some elements into the classroom to give the students sort of a broader picture of what's going on. And so again, there's a variety of upper division classes that offer those specialties. Next, beyond the coursework, we offer externships. And so these you can apply for, and depending on how you sign up for it, you can get credit for the externship, academic credit. The broadest variety, or most students who do the externships, go either into Multnomah County DA's office, where if they are certified as law students, where you have to have had 2 years of law school, have taken professional responsibility and evidence, you get certified and you actually can try cases under the direction of licensed lawyers. So these are typically misdemeanor cases, DUI and other cases, but they're real cases, and they will often be jury trials. And so students who go off and do an externship will typically come out of it having as many as 6 or 7 jury trials during the summer and maybe a fall semester. So Multnomah County DA is a large source of our externs. And then on the defense side, Metro, which has the public defense contract for Multnomah County and for Washington County, will take a lot of our students as externs as well. So they would be also doing a lot of jury trials and also handling pleas on the defense side. And the great thing about this is that the more one side hires of our students as externs, the more the other side will need to hire more students just to balance out the numbers. And so we often place many students in the externships. There are others as well. We do typically have a few students who go off to Clark County across the river in Vancouver, Washington. I think there have been a few students who've gone to Hood County out in the Gorge, and I think we've started to make inroads in Bend as well. So those are sort of the big options. There are some other placements that students will get as well, but that's the majority of them. And then finally, we offer some trial practice classes. So this would be simulated courtroom experience. Usually there are preset problems and you have students play witnesses, the defendant, and so on. And the course will lead up to a full mock trial. So that would be another avenue for getting what we call experiential experience. So when you put it all together, there are all those options. And if you really think this is what you want to do, criminal practice, you have the option of getting what we call the criminal law certificate. So the requirement is you take a certain variety of courses, you write one of your papers that's required for graduation on a criminal law topic, and you maintain a 3.0 GPA in the criminal law courses that will be used for to submit for the certificate. If you get all that on your diploma or your transcript, there will be a notation of the certificate earned for criminal law. And so it's just a nice little signal to employers that you were serious about criminal law and you really took what it is that we require to get that certification. So anyway, that's a quick recap of our offerings. I'll stop here and happy to answer any questions that come up later during the Q&A session.
Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Chloe Williams, our current student on the panel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe, as Professor Kaplan had said. I'm going to talk about just my background and then also just my time at law school. In the introduction, Professor Kaplan mentioned I want to be a public defender. So all of my experience is public defense oriented. So apologies if you're interested in wanting to be a DA, but I think some of the things are still applicable. Before I had moved to Oregon, I came from Kansas. I knew I wanted to be a public defender there. I was working in reentry programs, and I also externed at the federal public defenders in undergrad. I got a political science and a criminology degree. And I basically just kind of fell in love with criminal law. So that's what brought me to law school. And it was actually the clinic of why I chose Lewis and Clark specifically. And I'll touch more on that in a little bit. But, and when I say clinic, I mean the Criminal Justice Reform Clinic. And so when I got here, I was very focused on what I wanted to do. It was all criminal law stuff. So I joined Women's in Criminal Law. That's a student organization on campus that is for people who want to be in criminal law, whether it's the DA side or the public defense side. It's inclusive of everybody. And also you don't have to identify as a woman to be in the group, but it's just the name of it. And it's primarily filled with women, but we are LGBTQ friendly as well. And so I also joined PILP, the Public Interest Law Project, and a lot of people who are part of PILP want to go into public defense and some sort or public interest work, and that can encompass like a lot of things. So those were the two student organizations that I really wanted to focus on that related to like criminal law, public defense specifically. And then I also knew I wanted to be in the clinic since I came to Lewis and Clark for the Criminal Justice Reform Clinic. And when I was in the clinic, I got to work on post-conviction release cases. I got to do a clemency. I also got to work for parole team. So I did a murder review hearing and a prison term hearing. And our clients were incarcerated and they were coming up for all these hearings, whether it was a prison term hearing before the parole board or it was the murder review hearing before the parole board. And I got to actually work with the client, interview them. I got to write this amazing, just like, it's a prison term package or a murder review package, and you're actually doing all the writing, which is really, really scary as like a 2L or 3L. But you can do it. And then you also get to represent your client before the board. And so you're working on your oral and writing skills, which is great. And you're also forming a relationship with someone who is incarcerated, but also a part of the population that you want to work with. And I don't know a lot of students who get to do that in law school. So that's one reason why I really wanted to be at Lewis and Clark, was because of the clinic. We got to do that work. And then I also got to do a clemency, which was awesome. A clemency is a little bit different, but because it goes to the governor. And so I got to do that as my capstone, but also as part of the clinic as well. And some other things that I've gotten to do in law school was be a certified law student. So Oregon's really, really cool because it's one of the few states that allows you to practice as a law student. And when I say practice, I literally mean like practice, but you're under your supervisor's license. So like if you want to hear yourself on the court record, like your annoying screeching voice, like you can do that as a law student. And I've done it and I'm just like, oh my gosh. But it's valuable experience. You're handling cases from start to finish and you have your own caseloads. And you can do that whether you want to be on the defense side or the DA side. And that's after you hit a certain amount, the criteria. It's like have evidence done, ethics done, and you've been in a certain amount of credits. You typically do that your second, after your second year going into your third year. And so I've done that this last summer and then fall semester of my 3L year. And now I'm just working a little bit laid back, more in civil rights stuff. But I've gotten to do a lot of cool things, and those are just some of the cool things that you can do at Lewis and Clark, but also in Oregon as well. And if I could give any of you advice, I think my biggest advice would be to really research the school that you are going to. Like every school that you probably have on your mind is a decent school. You can get a JD from anywhere, but what sets the school apart is the opportunities that are available there. For example, when I was coming into law school, I knew I wanted to be a public defender. I knew I wanted to be in criminal law. I had that idea. So I was like, okay, that helps me just focus on places where I can get a criminal law certificate. But then I was like, I don't want to just like sit in a criminal law class. So the next thing was, well, what are experiences that I can't get elsewhere at another school? And the clinic was why that I chose Lewis and Clark specifically, because the clinic isn't everywhere. The clinic is at Lewis and Clark. So that would be my biggest advice, is just like really research that piece or interest that you are specifically interested in and make sure the school has it. If it doesn't, then don't go there. So I hope you come to Lewis and Clark though, because our clinics are awesome.
Thank you, Chloe. That made me feel so good. And now we're going to hear from Colin, who just graduated. I mean, it's been almost a year now. Wow.
That's really something.
I know. Go for
Well,
it.
I can just dive into it. Thanks, Professor Kaplan. As Professor Kaplan mentioned before we got started, before law school, I was a backup dentist at a dentist office. Well, I was a receptionist, but I called myself the backup dentist, and I really didn't do much. I took a year off between undergrad and law school, so I was close to K through JD, but not quite. And then when my now fiance decided on law school, I said, that seems good to me. I argue with people all the time. Let's go. So I did that, and we decided to move to Portland. It was a huge switch for me. I was scared to leave the Midwest, but I fell in love with the city and with Lewis and Clark's campus in particular. So currently I'm a public defender, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what I did in law school and how I got here first. So it didn't take me long to get interested in criminal justice. Between the stickers on Professor Kaplan's door that I really loved, and the really great talks that we had in Professor Yin's criminal procedure 1 class, and he uses a phenomenal textbook, which I actually brought with me to my job because I loved it so much. And I went to a panel much like this where Professor Garvin spoke, and it really made me think about questions I'd never thought of before, and how crime victims are so often erased from the conversation when we talk about criminal justice. And it really opened my eyes to just how multifaceted this profession is. And I found myself impassioned by all sides of the discussion. And so I quickly decided that criminal justice was the route I wanted to go. So I decided that I would do that was going to be my focus. Now I ended up taking several classes with Professor Yin. I took the criminal justice reform clinic with Professor Kaplan. I was a research assistant for both of those professors. And I'll just dive into a little bit more about what I did for each of them. At the clinic with Professor Kaplan, I did primarily post-conviction relief stuff, which blends civil and criminal work. It's generally a civil cause of action that reviews criminal cases. So when I was in the clinic, right before I started, the Supreme Court issued Ramos v. Louisiana, which was a decision that deemed non-unanimous jury convictions unconstitutional. So much of my clinic experience was working on case reviews and working on basically appellate work, trying to get people who were currently incarcerated PCR, post-conviction relief attorneys, or at least trying to get them new appeals, because their convictions were, if not overtly unconstitutional, they had been tainted by unconstitutional jury instructions, or they may have been tainted by unconstitutional jury instructions. That was great because I got to really dive into trial transcripts and learn how trials worked. For Professor Yin, obviously I took 3 classes with him, so I had a lot of time with him. I was an RA, so I got to do some research for him for an article that he was writing. I also got to I got to play the defendant in a assignment he gives that requires students to do an exercise in plea bargaining, which was actually a really interesting novel experience for me. And I think it was probably helpful for my current job now. At Lewis and Clark, beyond coursework like clinic and Professor Yin's classes, I took advantage of some externships. I clerked at the Clackamas Indigent Defense Corporation, which is the public defense consortium of lawyers in Clackamas County, which is right outside of Portland. I was in Oregon City. I did that my 2L year, and then I did that my first summer. And then my second summer, I was originally going to go clerk up in Tacoma for a judge, but the pandemic sort of changed my plans around a bit. So I ended up doing some more research for Professor Yin, and I worked again at Clackamas Indigent Defense Corporation for some fabulous lawyers who I absolutely love. And then my 3L year, I was a certified law student at Vancouver Defenders in Clark County, just across the river. So pretty much indigent defense all the way. That's what I did. And like Chloe, I did some other extracurriculars. I did PILP. I did the National Lawyers Guild, which is a great supportive organization. I got to get some almost legal experience with them, working on a hotline for protesters. I helped found an organization, the Oregon Criminal Defense Law Students Association. I don't know if it's still going on, but we hosted a couple panels, and I was research assistant, like I said, and I also did law review. So I got a wide variety of experiences, and it wasn't just resume building. I did stuff I was interested in, and I was really grateful to have all the opportunities I did. And I think pretty much everything I worked on helped get to where I am today. In particular, the relationships I formed with Professors Kaplan and Yin helped me get jobs afterwards. I asked Professor Yin, I said, hey, my fiance got a job in Jackson County, Oregon. I don't know anyone down there. Do you have any connections? And he said, no, I don't actually, but some guy reached out to me recently with an evidentiary question. I'll connect you to him. And ultimately he ended up offering me a job. And I basically said the same thing to Professor Kaplan, who was like, no, I don't really know anyone either, but why don't you reach out to the executive director of Southern Oregon Public Defenders and, tell him you worked with me and see what happens. So ultimately I ended up getting offered a job from him as well. So I got lucky, but I think part of the reason I was lucky is because I was looking outside of Portland, but as I was talking to the professors before this started, there's a dearth of public defenders right now. So there are opportunities pretty much everywhere in Oregon. And I know I'm short on time. If I could give a little bit of advice to you all before you start law school, it's find a place where you think that you are going to be able to forge strong relationships with people in the community, the professors, other people you're going to be able to work with. Someone I clerked for at CIDC is now the executive director of the Public Defenders of Marion County and Salem, and she's also a former Lewis and Clark grad. So there's a really strong alumni network. And my mentor, who Lewis and Clark assigned to me, who doesn't do criminal justice work, but when I was talking, I kept a really strong relationship with him all throughout law school. And he just works at a landlord tenant firm in Portland. When I was, some might say, whining to him about how I couldn't get a job or how I was having trouble finding something, he said, if you're really having trouble after the bar is done, why don't you talk to me? I'll see what I can do. And it really just, it was nice having what I perceived as a safety net for that stability after law school. And that was one of the things I regretted most about undergrad is I knew I didn't want to stay in that area. And I didn't really make connections with people that could take me anywhere afterwards. And at Lewis and Clark, I found it pretty easy. So that's definitely my biggest piece of advice is go somewhere where you're confident you'll be able to work with people you can bond with and who you can keep relationships with after law school. That's all I have.
Thanks, Colin. Thank you, everyone. That was great. I do want to just throw in, we were talking right before, and I'm happy to answer questions, as are my colleagues, but there is a real dearth for criminal lawyers on both sides. And I don't know, Meg, you can speak to the victim community. I mean, I have seen a few notices go by though recently for some victim lawyer positions also, but I think that it's one of the really, great things, I guess, about doing criminal law is these are, there's crime always, unfortunately, and there's a constitutional right for people to have a lawyer. So, there's definitely opportunities. And here in Oregon right now, there are so many offices all over the state on both sides calling me, asking for students that are graduating or students who graduated a few years ago, and everybody is hiring. So that's always really exciting, I think, when you're us and we're sending our students out in the world, we want them to have lots of opportunities. So I'm just going to open it up for questions, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the clinics. Do folks have questions for Professor Yin or Chloe or Colin? You can just raise your hand or put something in the chat or just speak. There's not that many of us.
Well, while you wait for that, Aliza, let me just add that in the last several years about jobs, that when we have faculty meetings, we get a report from the director of career services. And in the last several years, typically the largest single area of practice that we have placed the most students into jobs has been not environmental law, but criminal law. And that's because there is, as Professor Kaplan said, a constant need for people to practice in the area. It's not like a big, huge explosion. It's just a steady amount of jobs that are in the area. So it's kind of one of the not very well known aspects of our field.
Mm-hmm. True. I'm seeing some questions. Is there any work in criminal environmental law that we learn about? So it's such a good question. And actually the new law professor that we just hired, right? Tung, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Professor Oak, well, some of that really is a John Perry, the associate dean question, who's the one who runs the school on a day-to-day basis and decides who teaches what. But Professor Oko has like a number of intersecting interests. So her background is great. And actually, I forgot to mention this about one of the, I would say, selling points of our crim law faculty is that we prize actual practice experience, and two, that we've been trying to construct our faculty in a way that students will get exposed to a variety of different kinds of background practice. So my practice was at a large law firm. We defended corporations. Half of it was employment law, half of it was white collar criminal defense. And there's some things that I got to delve in very deeply on, having to do with doctrine. And then there's some things that I just absolutely did not touch at all. Like there was never any thought of a jury trial because that would be just terrible for the corporate client. And Professor Perry had the similar background to me, large law firm, white collar criminal defense. So our retiring professor, the one who we were replacing with Professor Oko, had extensive public defense and a little bit of prosecution background. When we were looking to replace her, it was really imperative to us that we find somebody who did not have the same background that Professor Perry or I had, because, we could all teach the course, but you get different perspectives. And especially if you're looking for a supervisor for papers, it can be really valuable to have somebody who has, we all each can offer different perspectives. And so Professor Oko has both prosecution and criminal defense experience. So that's her background on the criminal side. But she's also interested in aspects of environmental law and in health law. So the question about, is there environmental or criminal environmental law? We have traditionally had an environmental enforcement course that was taught by our retiring colleague, but it's clearly part of our portfolio. And I imagine that there's a strong likelihood that it would be continued eventually at some point by somebody, possibly Professor Oko. So yes.
And I can jump in real quickly and just note that so the Environmental Justice Clinic, the Environmental Clinic, right, Earthrise, and the Crime Victim Litigation Clinic, we are going to start having overlapping sessions to look at environmental justice, right? Because there's a pretty significant question of who's the victim in environmental justice cases, and can the whole community be? So we're doing overlapping session April 1st this year, and then we're going to start doing some case studies together and hopefully doing some joint representation.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. I can't wait to hear more about that. I like any clinic crossover stuff. Super cool. Other questions?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Amy. Nice to meet everyone.
Hi, Amy.
Hi. So I have a question about, is there any emphasis on specific areas of criminal law, like domestic violence or financial crimes? Just in terms of experience with the professors and where the alums tend to gravitate towards after graduation?
I think we can all answer something there. Maybe, Mimi, can you put a list of all the courses in the chat?
Yep, will do.
So Mimi is going to put in the chat a list of all of our courses. And as Professor Yin mentioned, We have a lot of, in addition to the sort of big, more foundational courses, we have a ton of seminars and smaller classes that deal with all sorts of issues. We have, that are in the all different sort of aspects, both practical and more doctrinal. So anything from wrongful convictions to we have a class that focuses on sex trafficking. We have a class on current issues in criminal law that we all teach, and we focus on a whole bunch of things. There's numerous victim courses that focus on that. There's Oregon practice that focuses on how to be a criminal lawyer in Oregon. That is for both sides. And I would say as Professor Yin mentioned, most of our students that practice criminal law after graduating go either to be a DA or a defense lawyer. But sure, many of our students also do clerkships after school, which sort of prepares them for everything and anything. And some go on to be appellate lawyers on both sides. In the criminal area, some go on to be represent victims. So I would think it's pretty spread out. I mean, I feel like our students, we really spread out in all the different areas. Does anyone else want to add anything about that?
Well, I think on financial crimes, there's Criminal Law 2, which is a regularly offered course that is essentially federal criminal or federal white-collar criminal law. So those would be where you would get the bulk of the financial crimes: wire fraud, mail fraud, tax fraud, conspiracy, and so on. So that would be a specific course. Domestic violence, we have had a course in the past I don't think it's specifically domestic violence, but is it sexual assault victims? So I think there would be a large piece of that would be domestic violence. So, again, a lot of these courses, there may be ones that we think, yeah, this is an area we need coverage in. We look for an adjunct who we think is qualified and appropriate. Sometimes there are practicing attorneys who come to us and say, hey, I'm interested in teaching this. We review the proposal and the curriculum committee will make a recommendation, but usually they would come talk to us on the criminal law faculty and say, hey, what do you think about this? And, we give our thoughts on it. So we're always looking to enrich our offerings.
And the only thing I'll add, and I see we have a question in the chat too, is in addition to the courses, right, you learn the doctrine, right? And then you start to, with the advanced classes, be able to kind of like move and apply it. And then you have your writing opportunities at the school too, right? You have your writing intensive experience, which we call the WE, right? And you have your capstone, which is your larger. And as students, you start to be like, okay, where do I want to dive in? Where do I want to take all this doctrine that I've learned and all of this stuff that I've learned and like dig in and start to have like my own intellectual experience around it and start maybe adding to the conversation. And so if your passion is domestic violence and you've taken all these courses, you're like, I want to dig in here. So that's the additional thing where you start to kind of hone it yourself because you spend a lot of time with your capstone. I'm sure Chloe and Colin can talk about that too, but you can focus that in criminal law and kind of build forward a little bit. So I see we have a question, which I think is just teeing up Aliza.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in this question. Is it Eugene? Hi. Can you speak to the opportunity with prosecutorial reform? I am interested in how restorative justice, where applicable, can be utilized to take pressure off the purely punitive justice route. So first of all, we have here in Multnomah County, someone who ran, a Lewis and Clark alum, actually ran as a progressive prosecutor, a great guy named Mike Schmidt here in Multnomah County. And the Criminal Justice Reform Clinic, we do a lot with them. First and foremost, we passed a law together last year that allows prosecutors and defense lawyers. We wrote the law with the DA's office to go into court and change a person's sentence. And so, restorative justice is a whole thing. Prosecutorial reform is a whole thing, but it is a restorative law. In fact, this afternoon, we had a hearing in Deschutes County with another progressive prosecutor using this new law, where we changed a woman's sentence from a felony that was not expungible to something that is expungible. And this is someone who is a former drug addict and committed crimes related to her addiction years ago. And now it's 5 or 6 years later, and she's totally transformed. She's just started a master's program and she works, and she's just, her whole life is different. And the DA joined us in a motion to lessen her sentence so it would be expungible in October. So after 5 years. So, you know, we do, we're working with the Multnomah County here in Portland. We help them set up their justice integrity unit where they review clemency cases and do parole and are doing these 819 cases, among other things. So, you know, my deep wish is that we had more people that were interested in doing, you know, this collaborative work. And I do hope to see that more in the future in Oregon. Yes, we have Brian Decker running in Washington County as a DA. We have Spencer Todd running in Marion County. Who knows, but there's definitely interest of people who see a little bit more of a restorative and reform approach to how we handle criminal justice. And so, you know, we'll see how things go. There's also popping up new, what we call restorative justice programs. There's just a huge amount of money from our legislature going into the system. And there's an application process going on right now for people, organizations, including DA's offices, and public defender offices and other organizations that want to do restorative justice work. So the state has just committed a whole bunch of money into creating these programs also. And you know, I could go on forever. I have like on my wall, if you can see that white chart behind me, that's a whole restorative justice chart that one of our clients created in prison because he started the restorative justice program in the Oregon State Penitentiary. And so there's actually a lot of restorative justice type programming in our prisons in Oregon. But I don't think we've yet fully figured out how to do it in a way that works for everybody, both the offenders and the victims in cases. It's really hard stuff and you really need professionals. It's not, you know, so I hope with all this money pouring in that we will create some really great projects. And I hope that the clinic will be involved. I'm just sort of waiting to see a little, but, but yeah, there are a lot of efforts going on. Good question. Thank you. Any other questions? We can, if folks want. Meg, do you want to tell, you didn't get a chance to talk about your amazing work in the clinic. It's more than a clinic. So why don't I let you do that a little bit, introduce yourself and do that. And then there might be more questions after that, or folks can meet with you or meet with me about CJRC.
Fantastic. And just to add to the conversation about the restorative justice, there are quite a few nonprofits that have been working in the background in the community for the last probably 20 years. One of them has been around for 20 years. So this turn to having some funding for them to do some restorative justice work also will be great. You know, there's been a really deep-seated restorative justice approach in Southern Washington and some in Multnomah County in juvenile, but they've been trying to expand to adult for quite a while. And so there's actually an annual conference of all the restorative justice providers in Oregon, the nonprofits that meet annually. And a couple of our students from the Crime Victim Litigation Clinic have gone the last few years to just kind of get in that community to try to expand, as Aliza was noting, some of the victim offender, I'm using the vocabulary of the statutes, dialogue programs that exist right now in Oregon are not well developed, I'll just say that, and really need to have some more nurturing. And so that's something that you can get involved into to try to improve those. So introduction of myself, Meg Garvin, she, her pronouns. I am the director of the Crime Victim Litigation Clinic. I'm also the executive director of the National Crime Victim Law Institute, which is based at Lewis and Clark. So our clinic, which students who are 2Ls and 3Ls, or really anything post 1L, should go with that because we have so many wonderful night students who are in the mix of the L's after the numbers. That we work on a whole spectrum of things. So we work on policy pieces, we work on litigation pieces, mostly when we're supporting other people doing litigation or we're doing amicus work. And then we also work on trainings. And we do that in the clinic and as NCBI. So students, what we do when students come in wanting to work on victimization issues, we really sit down and talk about, what do you want to learn? What do you want to talk about? Do you want to litigate? Are you interested in public policy? Are you interested in kind of learning how to translate law to community, right? So that you can be, doing know your rights efforts, right? Because that's something that our communities need, no matter kind of what rights you're talking about. When we're talking about victim law, so when the clinic is operating, we are under the umbrella of general victim law. Victim law is really the areas of law that survivors of harm, survivors of victimization have to navigate in the aftermath. So that can be housing law, employment law, criminal law, administrative law, right? You have to navigate a whole lot if you've experienced criminal harm. Our primary focus is in the criminal case, those procedural rights of notice, presence, opportunity to be heard in the criminal case. But the students will work on kind of any intersection for a survivor after their harm, from time of incident all the way through post-conviction. So by way of example, I was thinking about what are students working on this term? So this term we have students working in California. So we work all over the country, not just in Oregon. So the clinic students will work all over the country. So we have some students right now working on a mass victimization case in California, where the majority of the victims are not English speaking. And the court system right now is only going to afford them interpreters during their own testimony during the trial. So pre-trial hearings, they won't understand anything that's happening. Other parts of the trial, they won't understand anything that's happening. And so we are working with some community nonprofits down there to move the court to appoint interpreters so that the survivors can understand the process. And we are getting actually more support from the defense, right, than we are the prosecution, because the prosecution's afraid it's going to hit their bill, right? But so we haven't, the motion practice hasn't happened. We're doing lots of phone calls. We're doing lots of memo writing, but that's one of the things the students are working on. Working on a non-charging situation here. So pure criminal case here in Oregon. Working on situations where there has been systemic failure to charge in certain crimes, particularly for persons with disabilities. And the very specific thing the students are working on this spring is a pattern and practice of non-charging when the victim is nonverbal. So when they have a disability and can't verbalize what happened in the aftermath of an assault, even when it's on camera, there's non-charging happening. So we're working on that, like what's going on there. And then some legislation that students are working on, access to police reports, there's a work grouping that's going to work in the interim session in Oregon. So just going to be contributing some information there. So some students were interested in that. Some statutes of limitations work that's still happening, civil statutes of limitations. So really students end up what we do, the caseload we have is what's percolating in the country, who's asked us a question. We have this bucket of questions that we get asked in cases. And then we have students, and then we say, of this bucket, students, what are you interested in? And then that's what they get to work on. And so again, it can be legislation, it can be litigation, it can be straight up public policy. Some students have done reports to the Attorney General on various issues. And it's actually just great fun because victim law, I mean, even in this panel, right, you hear the conversation is, someone might become a prosecutor, someone might become a defense attorney. And so our brains are really structured to be there's two moments in criminal law, but of course there's a third moment in criminal law, and it's that other human being in the mix who has experienced some trauma and is trying to navigate through that. And so our clinic really takes also a trauma-informed approach. We spend a lot of time on understanding the neurobiology of trauma. We spend a lot of time on understanding trauma-informed lawyering practices that you can take forward with you into wherever you practice. We do a lot of guest speakers to make sure that you are learning both what's happening within Oregon, but also we know and hope our alum go all over the country. So we want you to have connections all over the country. I loved what Colin had said about like, yeah, we'll just connect you with anyone. Like, let's just get you connected. So it's great fun. The victim clinic is cutting edge issues that really are human forward. And fit really nicely with all the other offerings because, you know, Aliza's clinic is all about human forward too. And people perceive sometimes that they're opposites. Well, we don't always agree, but we're both human forward. And so then you have different conversations. So that's our clinic. Happy to answer questions.
And should I just explain our clinic too? And then, okay. So you've heard a little bit already, and I want to just say, like, every time I hear Meg speak about NCVLI, there's so much crossover in how we approach things, and how we're doing such cutting edge work. And I appreciate you. Meg and I actually had our first weird, like, what? We didn't even talk about this. And now we're on the other side of things this year. And that also made me realize that we need to communicate more because it's not about conflicts as much as it's about just, we cross over a lot of our issues and we want to be communicating because we have very much the same approach to things. So the Criminal Justice Reform Clinic, we are in our 7th year, I guess. And we have a bunch of projects also. We do what I call back end work, which is really different actually than being a defender or a DA, a public defender or a DA, which is all, you know, the students go to these offices and they work on the front end. They work pre-trial and they take a case through conviction or acquittal, right? The clinic comes in at the way back end, where in most situations, the person's done with even most of their appeals. Sometimes we'll chime in on an appeal or do amicus briefs to friend of court briefs to courts in Oregon, to the US Supreme Court. We've done some to ones across the country on particular issues, but they always sort of affect our clients. But our focus is on the back end, sort of when people have given up and they don't have hope. And how can we come in and help them? Our ultimate goal, I think, is to get people out of prison. And hopefully, and either when they should have, you know, their first opportunity or their 10th opportunity at the parole board. As Chloe mentioned, we represent individuals who have committed very serious crimes at the parole board and in different types of hearings. We do a lot of clemency work, and that's very dependent on the governor that we have. We have worked for 6 long years with the governor we have now to get her sort of in the place that she is now. And so she's doing a lot of clemency, and we're working directly with the governor's office on her strategy, on, helping her understand a lot of the issues involved in criminal justice. So that's been really exciting the last few years. We have a program for incarcerated youth where we provide legal services to all the closed facilities around the state. So students are regularly communicating with incarcerated youth about their legal rights, helping them draft things, do research, get information for them, visiting them. And we've done a lot of that online, but we've also been able to visit even during COVID. We have a pilot program right now where we're representing youth in something called juvenile set-asides. We were asked by the Oregon Public Defense System to pilot the first round of cases on this new right to a lawyer. So we've been doing that where we represent, youth who were adjudicated in a juvenile court. And we're actually litigating their cases and trying to remove or lessen the sentences so they won't have things on their records moving forward. And we've had 2 hearings and they've been great. And the students are involved in full litigation. We were heavily involved over the last many years working to end non-unanimous juries in Oregon, which is a very Oregon-focused thing where we would convict people with less than 12 jurors of felonies. Thankfully, the US Supreme Court, we were very involved in the US Supreme Court case. Students wrote an amicus brief to the US Supreme Court case that was used by the justices. So like, you know, that kind of thing is a little crazy, but amazing. So students over many years have worked on that issue in various forms, including Colin working on the post-conviction part of it last year. We do a ton of studies and reports. We're doing a huge study right now with Portland State Criminology Department on our parole system, and we'll put out a big report. We've done joint reports with Disability Rights Oregon. We did a huge one on the death penalty and how much it cost a few years ago. And then I guess finally, I think the reform part always needs to be mentioned since we're the criminal justice reform clinic. We learn from our cases and our clients the things that need to be changed. And then we write a bill and we testify. And when I say we, I mean, not just me, I mean the law students. And we, you know, we've been involved in one or more bills over the last, you know, number of legislative sessions that have made changes to the clemency system, that have made changes to the parole system. The 819 bill was ours that we did with the DA's office. And so we really try to pick things that we learn about in our cases. We learn about an injustice, and then we talk about how do we fix this? And sometimes that means studying it and doing a report. And then sometimes, and so everyone can know about this. And sometimes it means writing a bill and working to get it passed. Sometimes it's all of the above. Sometimes it's just really about thinking out of the box. How do we help our client affect their individual goals, and how do we make the system for people similarly situated different or better, or not as punitive or something like that. So that's, you know, I think that all of these issues are complicated, and the best thing I can say is come on to Lewis and Clark and, you know, we'll show you everything we're doing. There's a lot going on. And I think Meg and I would be really happy to answer any questions you have about the clinic or tests. There's not a lot of folks, so maybe we should just let people ask questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think like since we're a
Don't need
smaller
to-
grouping in tonight, we won't utilize the breakout room, so we'll leave it everybody in the same room.
Yeah, so if people have any further questions about the clinics, the work, or anything that we can answer, or the students can answer, or anything, now's the time. Could you both talk about how students can get involved in your clinics? Is it an application? Great question. 1 semester, 2 semester, great. Okay, go ahead, Meg, you go first.
Sure. Right. We were probably supposed to talk about that originally. Aliza and I both are like, there's so much exciting stuff. We want to go there too. But yes, knowing how to get involved. So there's tons of ways to get involved. And so I'm going to put the clinical piece in the middle, right? So first I'm going to talk about in your 1L year. Right, in your 1L year, there's tons of volunteer opportunities, right, to start getting involved. I mean, Colin mentioned some of the student groups, right, that you can already start to like just immerse yourself in community a little bit. But I know NCVLI, and I think Aliza, your shop too, takes volunteers too. So even 1Ls, as you're learning, you can start getting involved in doing some key research, some key pieces. But it's more discreet, right? At least for us as you're learning. And one of the things is we never want to interfere with your 1L classes, right? So we're always like, how do we help you stay energized in your 1L year in the area of passion without diluting like your ability to focus? But there's even volunteer opportunities. For the clinical part, ours does not have an application right now. We've debated going back to an application on and off, but particularly during COVID, we're like, we're not putting one more thing on anybody. So we don't have an application, but you just register for our clinic. Our clinic is a 1 semester clinic, but you can do a 2nd semester like as advanced with special permission. We only run our clinic during fall and spring. During summer, we host interns and externs, but we don't run the pure clinical course just as a way to manage our own caseload, right, and our own workload. There are tons of ways to get involved, though, post first year. So the further along you get in your career at Lewis and Clark, the more opportunities you have to do things through interns, externs, volunteer opportunities. And if it's the victim piece you're interested in, so our clinic doesn't do a lot of direct representation. We have a handful of folks that we do if it's going to be a strategic impact moment. But we partner with lawyers in the community a ton. So if what you want along the way is a placement where it's direct representation, then there's a number of nonprofit agencies, some NGOs and community that will take Lewis and Clark law students. And then there's also civil lawyers that focus on victimization issues, tort, that we would partner with to get you involved. But the pure clinic, it's 1 semester, no application, you just register for it. There is a cap, so you want to register for it soon because we usually exceed the cap. So that's it.
Okay, and for the Criminal Justice Reform Clinic, I'm open to sometimes having volunteers during spring semester of 1L. I like to tell folks, like, go through first semester, get your grades, and then let me know if you still want to come and do some volunteer work, because I feel like you do have to focus on 1L, and some people can handle doing 10 hours of something else, and some people can. I don't think I would have in law school. So like right now I have 2 law students that are helping us respond to prisoner letters because we get hundreds of them. And so that's been amazing. So that's like a first year volunteer opportunity. We sometimes have small research projects and stuff too that we might need. But the clinic, the Criminal Justice Reform Clinic is a full year clinic. We've taken everywhere from 8 to 15 people. It mostly depends on our ability to supervise. If I have lawyers working with the clinic, or if it's just me or 1 lawyer or something like that. And also how many, projects or cases we're trying to manage at a certain time. And we have an application process, which I felt like I kind of had to put in place, and because there was so much interest. And I also feel bad having people do an extra thing, but it's not a hard application. And we have a committee of former students that actually make the decisions. I'm kind of a tiebreaker, but I try to stay out of it because I know too many people at the law school and students. So I don't really want to put my thumb on the weight there, but on any side. But so people apply, and we'll take, like I said, anywhere from 8 to 15 students. It's 4 credits each semester. And, we do both semesters because I think we learned really early on that people start to kind of really get into it. And then it's November, right, Colin? I mean, it's like, wait, I'm just trying to figure this out. That's one of the reasons. And everyone would be devastated. I'm sure you have this, Meg, if they had to leave. And so and we go through a pretty intensive training process at the beginning and stuff. So it's good. Sometimes our cases aren't done after the semester. So that's another reason. We try to have, some of the projects are really focused that they can be done in a semester, and some really just can't. I mean, I feel like I'm always trying to hit it so they can, but clients are real people. The legislature is a legislature. I don't have full control over courts or courts. So that's another reason why we made it a year. And also, there's always a couple students that want to try more than one project. And so if they do finish and there's a good end, they can do something else. So usually there's 2 or 3 out of the group that will try another project in another way to, develop different skills, or just try something different. So it's year long, and I'm really lucky. I have a couple lawyers here that work with me and they're former clinic students, which is like a dream. So they know how I operate. They know what I want students to get out of it. I train them. And so they work with me in the same way that I demand, sort of, as a clinical professor, and they know what they wanted and needed. And so that's pretty nice, right, Colin? Pretty great, our lawyers. Yeah.
Still actively talk to both of my lawyer supervisors.
Yeah, they're all amazing. And we don't run the clinic in the summer officially, but we take interns and externs. And I have to say, in some ways, it's a different / better experience, because you can come and work full time. And that's a totally different experience than working 14 hours a week and having class. It's just really different. So we usually I say I'm going to take 3 and I end up having 10 or something. And so that's another opportunity. And the other thing I would say is, students are required, as Meg has mentioned and others, that students have to do this capstone paper. And one of the things, I sort of figured out very early on is that, it's not for everyone to write a law review article paper. And so I started opening up clinic papers and projects and reports to capstones. And, now it's really just my way of never letting anyone leave the clinic. And so people will do the clinic and then they'll stay and do a capstone, or they'll stay and do a clinic take 2, and they'll get credit during their next year doing clinic work. So there's a lot of ways to stay involved. If you've already been in the clinic and you want to stay involved, and there's ways of doing your capstone paper or doing a project with the clinic. I also feel, because we have to say no to people every year, I try to create lots of capstone opportunities for students who don't make it into the clinic, and all of that. So my hope is that if people don't get in the first year, then they have a better chance of getting in the next year. That's usually our policy. So yeah, I think that's everything. There's definitely many ways to get involved. Any questions about anything? Or Mimi, did we miss anything?
I think that was a great thing. I don't know if anyone wants to maybe chime in about how externships, can maybe help be a good way to outside of clinics. I think, Aliza, you mentioned a little bit about how you take externs, but Professor Yin kind of led off by saying, we have access to so many different counties, and some of those positions could also help prepare students for future practice in the area. So
I do think there's a really big difference between clinics and externships. And externships can really be everything from a student working in whatever office, helping a lawyer with their work. And that's amazing. And they do tons of research and writing, they'll be involved in meetings, they'll do all of that. Or it could look like a certified law student, where a student has their own caseload in a DA's office or a public defender office. Those are all potential externships, meaning an internship where you get credit, right? And there's a little bit more responsibility of checking in throughout the semester and writing journals to the folks at school, so everyone kind of knows what's happening. But I do think that there are amazing opportunities to do externships with judges. Obviously, the offices we've mentioned, DAs and public defenders, the Federal Defender's Office, the United States Attorney's Office, all sorts of organizations that do some or a lot of criminal related work, whether in all of these different areas, is amazing. Working with a solo practitioner. I mean, there's so many opportunities to learn directly from a lawyer doing the work. And that's what an internship or externship is, versus being in a law school environment where your professor's job is to train you and teach you and supervise you on casework or projects, etc. In the area. And it's more of a academic learning / hands-on experience. Did I get that right?
Yeah, so Mimi just posed a question, I guess, to all of us, but to me, starting off, can I speak a little bit about how externships and other practical skills training can help students develop skills that will help them in future criminal law practice? So I think Professor Kaplan's spoken a bit to that, but at a sort of a 30,000 foot level, you can think of the classroom, what we call the podium classes, as being kind of like physics, theoretical physics, and then doing the stuff in the externship is more like experimental physics. It's when you actually get to apply the theory in practice. And so the specific question about what kind of practical skills do you end up developing, I think it depends on what type of externship that you're doing, as Professor Kaplan said. But if we focus specifically on the prosecution and defense ones, then what you would see is, it's one thing for me in the classroom to talk about, okay, is plea bargaining allowed? I go over the Supreme Court cases that say that plea bargaining is not unconstitutional, and here's why, and then this is what you're allowed to bargain over legally, and this is when it becomes coercion and so forth. And so we can talk about the cases, but it's an entirely different situation to be doing it for real, where if you're the prosecutor, you are bargaining over how much jail or even prison time that somebody may be serving. And if you're the defense lawyer, you are bargaining over how little it is that the person will get. And there are real consequences to that. And so that is a skill and an experience that I think that you just cannot fully appreciate without doing it. And you can read about it, but that can prepare you a bit, but it's different from actually doing it. So that's when I think you would take what you've learned in class and then apply it in the real world circumstance. And then sometimes I actually have students in Crim Pro 2 who they might take it in their third year. So they actually have already been a CLS during the summer. And I think for those students, my sense is that it's very interesting for them because they come into the course kind of knowing a lot of it at a practical level. They know how to do it, but then hopefully what I offer them in the course is to see the sort of theoretical underpinnings of it and maybe help them see why it is the cases set up the doctrine that they do. So you can kind of approach it in either order. You get the experience first and then you get the theory, or vice versa. But hopefully they work together hand in hand and help develop the skills so that in the future, if you need to make a certain argument, now you understand why and how to make the argument more effectively.
I think a question was asked of me as well. Let me just pull it up. Colin, I believe you mentioned you were a CLS student and Chloe was too. Do you think that's necessary for externship opportunities in criminal law after your 2L year, or a requirement for certain types of externships? Just as a reminder, CLS stands for Certified Law Student, and in Washington it's called a Rule 9 intern. So when I was at Vancouver Defenders, I was a Rule 9, and when I was at Clackamas Indigent Defense Consortium, I was a CLS. It's essentially the same requirements either way to become one. Being a member of a clinic is one way you can become a CLS easily. So just another benefit of joining either of the clinics. And I don't know if it's necessary to get externships your 2L year in criminal, or your 3L year in criminal law, but it's definitely helpful. For one thing, offices can rely on you at that point to take the brunt of some less important court appearances off their overworked attorneys' shoulders. When I was at Vancouver Defenders, I took over the arraignment docket, and I was in court for 4 to 5 hours every morning, making pretrial release arguments or bail arguments, which was terrifying at first. I certainly had supervision for the first, couple weeks, but after a while, it really built up my comfort level, talking in court and appearing in front of a judge and going into a breakout room, because I was remote, going into a breakout room with the client and talking to them and learning the questions that needed to be asked to figure out who they are, quickly scanning the probable cause affidavit. Just it gave me a lot of experience, and that I would not have been able to do if I were not a certified law student. And same thing at CIDC. When I was there, I got to do I didn't get any trial experience because the pandemic was sort of just ramping up and trials were pretty much canceled for months at least. So I did get to do other hearings though, which was cool and an important experience as well. So I wouldn't say that it's required, but it's certainly something you should look into as you enter your 2L year and you're deciding what classes to take, because as I believe Professor Yin mentioned, you need to have taken ethics and evidence to be qualified, or you need to be a member of a clinic. It's quite possible that being a CLS is totally irrelevant to other type of externships, but as for criminal stuff, it's certainly important later on. Unless maybe if you're at the federal public defenders, where it's a lot of reading and writing, and you're not necessarily going to be doing a lot of stuff in court. Those cases are generally slower moving, I think, and also generally more serious than what you're going to get exposed to at a state trial level office. So maybe if you're doing that, then you don't have to worry about a CLS. But yeah, it's definitely something that you should consider if you want to do DA work or public defender work. And I don't know if it's important for victim advocate work. Professor Garvin might be able to expand on that a little more.
Colin, you're exactly right. It just depends, right? I mean, depends what you want to do. If you're going to go into court and make arguments, you're going to need the CLS, right? If you're going to be doing some other pieces, you don't. So there's ways to get amazing practical experience without it. But there are pieces of practical experience that you can't get if you don't have it. So the in-court piece on your own, that you need the CLS. So you kind of want to just build all the pieces and kind of add them together, and then you have the holistic experience.
Okay, that's a lot of blabbing at you. So we hope that you've learned a ton. If you have more questions, we'd be happy to answer them. You also can email any of us. Why don't we all put our emails in the chat, or you can Google us or whatever as you're thinking about your decisions and everything else. We're all really available to talk to you. And if you haven't been to the law school, we really hope you'll come because it's gorgeous. I'm from somewhere else, and when I first came here, I could not, I still can't believe it sometimes how beautiful it is. So it's a really beautiful, peaceful place. So
yeah, thank you all so much for coming and being a part of this panel, and to the admitted students, thank you so much for being here. Just a reminder to you, next week, we only have 2 more weeks of these specialty spotlights. I can't believe it's gone by so fast. Next week is our business law and business and tax law specialty spotlight. And then also we still have spots available for our in-person preview day. So if you want to take Professor Kaplan up on the offer to come visit campus, you should definitely check us out for the in-person preview day on April 9th. It's going to be a really great time, and we're going to have free food, and it'll be a great chance to meet your free food is a very common thing as a law school student. But yeah, so we hope you all join us for that, and we'll see you next week too if you're interested in business and tax law. But thank you, Professor Kaplan, Professor Yin, Professor Garvin, and Colin for coming today. It was so great to see you all and for you to be here. Hope everyone has a great night. Thank you.
thank you. Thanks so much. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you.
Good to see all of you. Bye.